Snyder.
Chapter 18. Don't Panic. Sebastian Simmons. Upstate Massachusetts. 2018. After 10 failed calls to Anna's cell phone, I shoved the front door open and hobbled down the stairs, rustling my keys around in my hands. I'd left my cane behind, too hopped up on adrenaline to be distracted by the pain of moving my bad leg. I breathed heavily, quick, panicked gasps of disbelief and fear. Not for myself, of course, but for my family. My son Archer had run away from home just moments ago. My wife, Anna, and our 2 twin girls, Sarah and Susie, had driven into the city to visit the farmer's market while I sat at home, crippled and useless as always. And now, after seeing the bloody carnage of the first moments of infection on the news, I couldn't think straight. I couldn't move quickly or smoothly. All I could do was fumble the keys around in my hand, flipping clumsily through them as I came to stand by my truck, parked out front of the barn. I yanked the door open and dove inside, flinching from the pain shooting up my leg. I slid the key into the ignition and started the truck, hearing the engine roar to life. I glanced out the rearview mirror to see our dog, Elvis, standing on the porch, curious and worried. And despite every bit of my brain yelling at me to move faster and find my family, I froze in that moment, staring at the chained door to the barn. I sucked in a pensive breath as the memories of my childhood forced their way into my head, as the time in the fort and the years training for this day flooded over what I was thinking. Because despite everything I was feeling, I knew better than to do what I was doing. The growling engine of my truck kicked up exhaust against the dirt and rung out across the empty fields, a beacon of noise to every living person and lumbering undead in earshot. I'd left the lights and TV in the house on. A wind chime on the porch fluttered in the breeze. The smell of Elvis and his marked territory littered the ground, and every single damn sight burned my mind and tormented my soul. It was happening. What I'd spent so much time preparing for and praying would never come true was actually happening. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I rocked back and forth, fighting with myself to make a decision. I didn't know where Archer had disappeared to or where his girlfriend lived. I didn't know how far in or out of town my wife was and whether or not the infection had completely engulfed our area. And as much as I wanted to burst down the road and act like a hero, I knew that if I did, I'd not only be risking my life, I'd be abandoning the only place our family knew to go in case of an emergency. If I left home and they didn't come back, they wouldn't know what to do to survive. If I left and found them, there was little chance we'd be able to make it back. And if I went looking every which way like so many other panicked and senseless people would be doing at that very moment, I'd almost certainly be offering all of us up like lambs to the slaughter. Fuck, I screamed, slamming my hands against the steering wheel as a furious tear forced its way down my cheek. I ground my teeth and reached for the gear 10 times, stopping just short and running through the situation in my head over and over again. Don't panic. Remember, assess the threat and then make your move. Take a deep breath. Calm down. Don't just react. Decide. What should I do? I turned the truck off and put the keys back in my pocket, staring at the open road leading away from our home. It was too much of a risk to go looking for them, and as much as it ripped my heart out to have to sit idly by and wait, I had no other choice. I opened the door and stepped out of the vehicle in a daze of conflicted sorrow. I pulled the front seat of the truck back and removed the rifle and box of ammunition that I kept behind it. I closed the door and leaned my back against it, feeding rounds into the rifle and filling my pockets with the rest of the bullets. Elvis ran to my side and tried licking my hand to cheer me up, but I just smacked him away and hobbled past on my way to the house. He kept his distance, but followed behind me all the same, mindful of the fact that I was trying to hold back tears. I dropped my slow old ass down onto the front steps, put the rifle by my side, and sunk my head into my hands, tormented and alone. All I could do was sit and wait, praying to see them again, hoping that they were safe, and if they weren't, that they died a good death before the undead could Jesus Christ. My heart pounded like someone was punching me in the chest, and I looked up to the heavens, begging, please, please, God, please, let me see them again. Let them come home safe and sound. I knew this day would come, and I understand why you've brought it, but not all men deserve your wrath, not my family. Please, God, please. I sat there for I don't know how long, jumping back and forth from every thought and emotion I had in me. To say that I was overwhelmed didn't do justice to all the shit rushing to the surface. I'd never felt so terrible in all my life. And yet, as time ticked away, I couldn't help but feel a creeping calm in the back of my mind, as if God had heard my prayers. Despite all my fears and uncertainties, I felt hope. My eyes wandered along the horizon, barren fields and rustic beauty, clear blue skies and empty roads. And then, as I combed the view for movement, I spotted something that brought me to my feet and my heart to a standstill. A tiny dot moved full speed down the road as it appeared over the horizon, heading my direction. I took a few baffled steps forward, squinting to try and pinpoint the make of the car, hoping and praying all the while. And then, when it came within a few 100 yards of the house, an elated smile of jubilation and relief spread so wide across my face my eyes practically shut. I released a joyous laugh of celebration at the sight before me. My wife's car was headed home. I slung my rifle over my shoulder and moved out towards where the road and the driveway met to greet her. But as I nearly reached the pavement, I stopped dead in my tracks, spotting something else moving in the fields. Lumbering silhouettes of a handful of people stood out in the middle of the grass where it didn't make any sense to go. By the time Anna's car got close enough that I could see the expression on her face, I knew immediately that she'd seen terrible things. The twins, Sarah and Susie, sat in the back seat, pale and frightened. Tears streamed down my wife's cheeks as she screeched the car to a stop and threw off her safety belt. I hobbled over to her as she popped open the door and stood up, wrapping her arms around me and squeezing me tight. She sobbed hysterically, holding on for dear life. I nestled my head against the side of hers, looking out at the lurking figures approaching us from all directions. But I didn't have the heart to tear Anna off me just yet. I waved to the girls in the back seat as they emerged, moving slow and cautious, as if they were going to be ill from all that they'd seen. They clutched their stomachs and leaned against the car. Anna let me go, and I hugged them both, kissing them on their foreheads and pulling them close. And while I thanked God for seeing them home safe, I also counted 15 figures approaching the house, the closest at about 100 yards. I turned to look at Anna as she noticed what I was looking at. "Get the girls inside," I instructed, pulling the rifle off my shoulder. Anna winced at my demand, afraid of everything that had happened, but never a coward. She stepped over to my side and put her hand on the barrel of my rifle, pushing it down towards the ground. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she asked, splitting my attention between her and those approaching us. Anna didn't know about the infection. It was the only thing I'd never told her. "You need to trust me," I replied, taking her hand off the gun. "Trust you? What are you doing with the gun, Seb?" "Get the girls inside, lock the doors, and start making calls to try and find Archer," I stated, raising my voice as I noticed a few more people emerge from over the hill. "Where's Archer? He didn't come home this morning," she exclaimed, straining her voice as panic started to set in. "He ran away with his girlfriend, and when? About an hour ago. I don't know exactly, but we need to go find him." "We can't. Go inside the house and," I tried to say, fighting to get a word in that would calm Anna down or help her understand what was really happening. "What the hell's the matter with you?" she screamed, shocked by my cold disposition and wandering attention. The closest undead were within 30 yards now, their arms outstretched and mouths open, and as I locked eyes with one, seeing into its empty stare and hearing its hollow moan, my adrenaline started pumping and I lost all patience with my wife. "God damn it, Anna, listen to me," I shouted, grabbing her by the shoulders and locking eyes. "You remember the fort I showed you when we were younger?" "What the hell does that have to—" "It was in preparation for today. We knew this was going to happen, and now that it has, you can't waste time asking me questions or we're all going to die. We can't go looking for Archer. He has to come to us, and you have to get the girls inside and do exactly what I said," I yelled. as harsh and unyielding as I'd ever been with her. Anna stared at me in horror, not for the tone that I'd used, but because she could see that I meant every word that I'd said. And while she didn't understand that the figures approaching us weren't people anymore, that they weren't our friends or neighbors, she could see that there was nothing that could be done to stop me from doing what I was about to do. "Mommy, I feel sick," Susie cried, her hands held tight around her sides as she struggled to remain standing. Anna turned around and gasped as Sarah fell to the ground as pale and weak as her sister. She rushed over to them and helped them up, holding their hands as she moved towards the house, giving me a parting glance of quiet desperation. I tried to look strong for her sake, hearing the sound of ghouls approaching close behind me. I took a deep breath and prepared myself. "Lock the doors," I shouted, holding my rifle up and turning to face the undead. Lance was the name of the first poor bastard I lay eyes on when I swiveled around. He'd worked at the convenience store not far from us. He was always friendly and a little quiet. The rumor was he could play quite the piano and even tutored on weekends. My wife and I had once thought about sending our girls to get lessons from him until they decided on guitar and bass instead. But now that he'd been infected, everything that made him who he was gone. I reminded myself I was doing him a favor by pointing my rifle at him. I closed one eye, looked down the sights, and blew Lance's head off, turning my attention to his boss, Jerry, next. I realized I recognized just about everyone the closer they got, and with each shot of my rifle, the memories I had of them ran through my mind. Memories of better times in a soon-to-be forgotten world. A world that would change forever and leave just about everyone I knew and loved behind. It broke my heart putting them down, but I knew not to think about it too much until after the shots were fired and the fields were cleared. I lowered my rifle, looking at the 15 shell casings littering the ground, and turned to head back to the house. For the moment, I'd stopped a swarm from forming. However, at the same time, I'd made enough noise to ensure more would come, and who knows how many more would follow them. My heart beat quickly, but my mind stayed clear. Strangely, killing came naturally. And while it certainly didn't feel good, it didn't feel so bad that I'd hesitated either. I was proud of myself for that. My family was safe for that. And as I slid my key into the front door, hearing Elvis's bark from the other side of it, my eyes returned to the open road, hoping to see Archer headed home before I locked up and began fortifying. Nothing. Nobody. God damn it. My son was still out there. I waited a moment, gripping the knob and hoping. But it didn't take long until I forced myself to face the truth. If he was still out there, it meant I'd probably never see him again. The last thing any parent ever wants is to outlive one of their children. It's a feeling worse than death itself. And standing there on that porch, I felt the overwhelming hurt of going on without my son. Tears of grief streamed down my broken face. I turned the knob, stepped inside, and locked the door behind me.